Hey friends, welcome back to Thrive in Online Healing Podcast. This is episode 84. And this week, I'm so excited. We're going to nerd out this is part two. So last week we were talking about epigenetics and how it influences your grandchildren, how you influence your grandchildren, especially if you have a female. And this week we're going to take it a step farther and we're going to talk about mindset and perspectives and how you're either leaving a legacy of trauma or you're leaving a legacy of abundance. And whether you're conscious of it or not, you're leaving one or the other. Or maybe there's some in between. But for today's topic, we're just going to go those two. So.
True. I'm excited about this topic. When we talked about sort of the epigenetics piece, right? When we talked about how our physical health is influenced by our grandparents, our great grandparents, and then how our physical health and our mental health influences those generations to come, those your kids, grandkids, even great grandkids. And so when we take it even that step further and looking at our mindset and our belief system, right? So we have talked about how those chemical reactions in our brain with the neurotransmitters and the neurochemicals and the neuropeptides affect our physical and our cellular health, right? Well, when we create or we create a belief system or we have a mindset, right? That overflows not just into our physical health and our mental health, but that overflows to all the people that we have contact with, right? Or that we influence. Mm-hmm. So it's not just our kids and our grandkids, right? It could be brothers, sisters, parents, grandparents, teachers, right? Friends, co-workers. And we're creating this environment with those around us based on our mindset and our belief system.
Yeah. And I like to use the word programming, but you can use like indoctrination, transfer of beliefs, whatever you want to call it. Programming is always what I use with my clients. So that's my kind of default. And so we have to like back up to childhood, like that 0 to 7, right? And we have influencers. Our parents are influencing us. Our grandparents, our relatives, their friends. If we're in school, all of our peers, then our teachers, then if we're part of a religious system, that religious system is influencing us. And in society, whatever culture you live in, right? And there's multiple cultures in the United States, but like your ethnicity and that culture that comes with that, right? And then your country's culture, all of those things are, from my perspective, programming us. They're teaching us this is right, this is wrong, this is what we believe in, this is who we like, this is who we don't like, this is who you're safe with, this is who you're not safe with. This is who we want you to become. This is who you think of. This is how you should identify as yourself, right? Like all this feedback is coming from all of these, from a child, experts, right? Because they know better. They're older and they protect us. From a childhood survival perspective, the adults protect us. They bring us food, they give us shelter, they clothe us, right? So innately, we're trustworthy. We trust all this information that's coming in, that it's coming in from a truthful perspective. So we take all these belief systems in, believing this is reality. And that becomes our perspective on the world. That's how our brain sees the world. Because if we go into brain science, our reticular activating system is what filters all this information, right? And so we have created belief systems. And the RAS now is filtering information. This is what we believe. This is the only information that's pertinent. All this other information is not pertinent. So we are not going to even pay attention that it even exists.
Right.
You can see as we grow that RAS is only taking information that's affirming the belief systems that have been embedded in you. So that's a very long like explanation, but I want us to understand, like, I don't think that these things are programming is like this hideous thing, right? That like people intentionally programmed us with these horrible belief systems. Like they were programmed and they believe because their beliefs and their RAS that that was truth and that was reality. And that's what was going to keep them safe. And then the generation behind them, same thing, generation behind them. So then you can see now how society has the perspective and the indoctrination that it does because it's years of programming over and generations over and over and us believing this is just reality. It's truth.
Right, right. So that programming shapes our worldview, right? Is how I would describe that. That shapes your worldview of all those influencers that you had as a child from 0 to 7. And that filtration system that our reticular activating system has is it's very nicely, based on those belief systems, right, begins to take in information and it assimilates with what we know to be true, what we believe to be true. Yeah. And so we see that, and we may have talked about this before, but we see that in very, very clearly in child development, right? We see that very clearly in child development, from even 0 to 3. Our body, our mind begins to assimilate things. So if you showed me an animal with 4 legs, right, that has ears and a tail, and you tell me that's a cat, and I learned that that's a cat, and then you show me another animal with 4 legs, ears, and a tail, and I think, oh, that's a cat, and then you tell me, oh no, that's a dog. My brain wants to assimilate those two things together, right? It's 4 legs, has ears and a tail, until you teach me that that's a dog. Mm-hmm. And so we see that in child development. Our brain does the same thing with our belief system as our worldview is shaping, as that programming, right, is being formed and shaped by all the influences around us, right? Not just people, but media, right? That we may be around from 0 to 7, and that media that's around the adults who are in our lives. Mm-hmm. And so our brain, creates these neural pathways that says, hey, all right, this is familiar, right? Yeah. I was taught that this is right and this is wrong, or that we should like this and we shouldn't like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or you're going to have a tendency or a bias towards, something, right, versus something else. Mm-hmm. Because that's, what's been programmed within those influences.
Yeah. And I just had the word like imprinting came to mind. Like we're imprinted, and an imprint is like let's say you have like concrete, right? And I take my hand and I push it into wet concrete. I've imprinted my hand into that wet concrete, and then it dries, and then that's there, right? I'm not saying the brain's like that it's like concrete and can't be changed, but it's not necessarily like sand, right? Like I put my hand in sand and then I can just swish it and it goes away. Like the brain doesn't work like that either. It's somewhere in between, right? Like we're imprinted and it's not solid, but it is somewhat fixed, and it takes effort to change that imprintation, right? Like you look at a baby dog we've heard it, like that's been imprinted onto a mama dog because it lost its mom, and it thinks that dog is its mom, right? For a long time, it's going to think that dog is its mom, unless something else comes that shifts that dog's perspective, right? And it's the same with our brain. So when we've been imprinted with all these things, yes, it is difficult when you start rubbing up against them, right? And it does feel like there's lots of emotions that come with it. Like I want to use the example of like, I grew up in the church, in the Southern Baptist Christian church, right? Like from the time I was little, like Sunday school through. So I was imprinted with this is how we see the world. This is how the world works. This is how afterlife works, right? So when I left Christianity at 30, what was it, 35? It was very difficult and it was very painful because I was rubbing up against like what I perceived as reality before. And I didn't know what the other, like, if this isn't reality, what is? And who am I now? Because this is how I identified myself. So I'm not only losing this belief system that my culture and my family system supports, I'm losing part of my identity. And like the ground that I thought was solid underneath me has now become sand. And it is a painful process. And there's a lot of shame and guilt and anger involved in these like very entrenched belief systems that really are shaping our perspective and how we interact with the world. Like if you look at like just the idea of like homosexuality and racism and sexism, like all these things have been imprinted into our world and our collective for probably hundreds of years, if thousands of years, right? So these beliefs die hard. Yes, we are much more progressed now, but you can see like the rub in people when it's like, this is all I've known as reality. And now you're telling me that this isn't true.
Yeah. It is a challenge, right? When you come up against that, what you've always thought was solid, and now you feel like that floorboards or that carpet is removed from beneath you, and it becomes the sand that's moving and changing.
Yeah.
It can feel very unstable and even frightening in some cases for folks, or angering, just like, oh, I feel like I was lied to for so long. Why didn't anybody tell me different?
Yeah.
Right? Why didn't anybody ever say that that's not true? Right?
Because the people believed you around you, but didn't believe it wasn't true. They believed it was true. That's why they couldn't tell you.
Exactly. And sometimes it takes this grief period, right? Or this grieving process to let go of that belief system or that programming, that imprint that you've had your whole life, right? I mean, from 0 to 7, your whole life has been built on these belief systems. And so oftentimes, having or recognizing that change, and recognizing it's okay to have a little bit of a grieving process for that belief system, and how that belief system has changed your worldview. And now that you've kind of got a different perspective, or the hint of something could be different, right? Giving yourself grace and trying to figure out, okay, how what do I want to believe?
Yeah.
What do I want to believe? Where am I going to get my influences or my information to now as an adult to reprogram what I've known my whole life, right? Or what I thought I knew.
So difficult for people. And I didn't know why until I've been coaching so much, right? And once you get a lot of that experience, you start seeing and understanding truly. For me, I have to practice the art, understand like, oh, I see. It's hard for people because our relationship with ourselves is so damaged. Mm-hmm. We don't trust ourselves. So if you're asking me to let go of a belief system that I thought was reality, right? That means I have to go form my own belief systems. And if my relationship with me is damaged, I don't trust me. And if I don't trust me, how can I trust myself to go create a new belief system?
Right.
What if I choose poorly again and I find that one's a lie?
True. There is a point, not our point, but from my perspective within our journey, right? And trying to understand sort of our role or where we fit or our influences in this world and in this world around us. Yeah. There's a little bit of soul searching in there, right? There's a little bit of soul searching. There's a little bit of understanding and figuring out where our spirituality lies, that contribute or that, contributes to our belief system.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah. I think that in that process, in that journey, as people begin to build confidence in themselves, in what they want to believe, and maybe even if they veer off from the majority, right, or veer off from what they've known their whole lives, sometimes that can be really empowering for folks, because then you start to realize, okay, I got this belief system. I can see where that belief system came from. And now I'm at a point in my life that I want to ask why. Like, why do we believe that? Why do we do that? Because if you don't ask why, right, then it's hard to see. You're following that belief system out of maybe duty, but not out of understanding.
Right.
Yeah. I have a really quick example. So I have these friends who were talking the other day, and maybe not the other day, it's been a few months, but they there's another word for it that I can't think of right now, but they take off the Sabbath every day, right? And their Sabbath is on Saturday.
Okay.
And so from Friday night sundown to Saturday night Sunday morning is Sabbath. And so there's certain things that they don't do on Sabbath. That's part of their belief system.
Yeah.
And growing up, what they were taught was, you can't go swimming on the Sabbath. You can't do it. You can't swim on the Sabbath. And he's an adult now. He's in his 50s. And he found himself that he thought that was a rule in the church, because that's what his mom taught him. That's what his whole family taught him. You couldn't go swimming on the Sabbath. And he's got kids, right? That's what he's been telling his kids. You can't swim on the Sabbath. That's the unwritten rule. And so he started to go back and look and explore and figure out, where does this rule come from? Like, what is it about swimming that's not okay for us to do on the Sabbath?
Yeah.
And the more he kept looking and digging and asking why, trying to find the evidence, he couldn't find it. So eventually he went to his mom and he said, "Mom, why did you tell us we couldn't swim on the Sabbath?" And she was like, "Oh, because I was tired and I didn't have anybody to watch you guys at the pool. So you couldn't swim on the Sabbath because I was afraid you would get hurt, right? Like somebody would drown." And so he, was telling me that he was relaying the story to a group of us. And it was like, oh, see, we need to ask why. But I mean, he's 50 years old. So his kids are 13 and 11 and 13, right? And their whole lives, they haven't been able to swim on Saturdays because
Grandma was tired and needed a break.
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of those things, right? Like, if you don't ask why, or try and figure out, okay, why do I believe this? Why, where does this come from? And if the evidence is there and it makes sense to you, that you don't necessarily have to reprogram that. But if the evidence isn't there and it doesn't make sense to you, right? Or you can't find that connection, then maybe that's a programming that we can unprogram or let go.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think that I would love to dive into sorry, that was a cat. So some of these are pretty obvious programmings, right? Like the whole religion, the how we feel about the LGBTQ I plus community, how we feel about other races, right? Like those are pretty obvious, like programming that we're making efforts to unprogram, right? But I think there's this programming is not talked it's obvious, but it's not talked about. And so it's not even on the radar. And I
Mhm.
think, and that is this, I can only talk about the United States, but I think it's kind of everywhere. But the United States, this programming of victim mentality and powerlessness. We're programmed to believe as a society, culture, collectively, that our emotions lie outside of us. Our
Mhm.
power lies outside of us, right? That if we want to be happy, we have to externally go chase things down. And marketing has figured that out and it capitalized on that, right? And I think that's why it makes it like they don't want us to find whoever they is. The powers that be, I don't know, don't want us to be aware of this because then it takes the power away from all the marketing, right?
Mhm.
It's happiness, emotions don't lie outside of us. Emotions are created in the brain by a thought, right? It's a chemical reaction. We've talked about this so many times. It's a chemical reaction. It's a way the brain communicates to the body is these emotions. And if we want to feel an emotion, we have to change the thought because thoughts create emotions. I go to, I don't know, I go to Walmart and I buy a new purse. I don't know. I'm just making stuff up off the cuff, right? Like my programming tells me this purse has now made me happy.
Mhm.
The reality is, I have thoughts about this new purse. I'm excited about it. I love the color. I love this and that are making me happy. The purse is not making me happy. My thoughts about the purse are.
Right.
It because we don't understand that we just keep go seeking more outside of us, right? We keep buying stuff and we keep expecting all the other humans to act how we want them to act so we can feel the emotions we want to feel and then we're frustrated all the time. And we feel powerless all the time because we're depending on the outside to create the emotions we want. And I think it's important that we understand as we had this discussion because we started this like you're either creating a legacy of trauma or you're creating a legacy of abundance. And so how you perceive the world in terms of you are the locus of control, all the control comes from within me. And I can see that things like I create my reality, I create the results in my life, then I can see the abundance. But if I buy into society's propaganda that my happiness and my emotions lie outside of me, then I have to buy into the scarcity mentality, right? And that others have things that I don't have. There's only so much, right? And they've done such a good job of programming us into scarcity because right, supply and demand. Less
Yeah.
supply, higher demand that people will go buy,
Mhm.
right? And it's like if you look at nature, it's not scarce.
Right.
Like, there's so much air, there's so much water, right? There's so much sun. Like nature is abundant.
Right. Yeah.
But I think we need to start like thinking about this from a perspective like, okay, I've been programmed to think that I'm powerless, that all the power lies with outside of me. Is this true? Where is the evidence? And where's the evidence that I do have control? Because how I believe about this is how I will teach my children. And how I teach my children is how they will see the world and how they will teach their children if they don't change the pattern. So you can see when you believe in the society propaganda of you don't have power, you're a victim, the world is scarce, right?
Right.
Trauma like is just wrapped up in that bundle because you have no power,
Right.
right? And then out of our wounds, because we don't know, we think that all of our emotions are created outside of us and we can't figure out how to maintain happiness. We're miserable all the time, right? We show up in the world as a victim. We show up in the world as someone that has not healed their trauma. And we pass those traumas on to the next generation. I parent my kids from my wounds. And out of my wounds, I wound others.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, we have when our belief system and our mindsets are from that, in that scarcity model, right? It's doesn't just affect our kids and our family, but even like people you work with, right? People that you interact with at the grocery store. There are a lot of times that we influence people we don't even know about, right? And so if we're coming from that place of that victim mentality, that place where I don't have control over my happiness, that I have to seek it elsewhere, that, yeah, people see that, right? Like the world responds to that in certain regards, and especially when we're talking about society and that societal propaganda, right? They want you to buy into it, because then, right, if we are continuing to seek that happiness or seek those emotions outside of us through retail therapy, through binge watching Netflix, through self-medication, right? Then that perpetuates that cycle. Creates this continuous trauma, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like, and you can speak to this, like the Native Americans and like the Trail of Tears, and like the trauma and the generational trauma that's been created from that, right? The African community, right, in the United States, the slavery and the trauma and the generational trauma since then. You look at women, right, and the generational trauma that's been passed on since then. And you look at like not the Holocaust, right? And like how previous to that, the collective belief about scarcity, these people have all the stuff, right? How they capitalized on those belief systems, because those belief systems create fear and powerlessness, in which a savior has to come and save us. Hitler became that savior for a certain amount of Germans. He was going to change the rhetoric for them, right? And out of that fear and that scarcity and that victim mentality, they aligned with him.
Right.
I could even use today, for example, in this whole pandemic, right? Fear and powerlessness allows the powers that to be to gain more traction and have more power. So of course they don't want to talk about this rhetoric, that really control comes from within us. Our brain, as long as you have function of your brain, you are in control, because you always have decisions and you always have choices.
Right.
And they don't want us to believe that. Or I don't even say that. Whatever. The collective belief system does not want us to believe that.
Well, true. Because here's the thing, is if we as people, right, as human beings, believe that we have the power and believe that we have the opportunities and the abundance, there's no need for certain social constructs.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so those things, come out of that scarcity mode. And to be honest, at least in the US, but I mean, this happens in other countries, at least with other countries that have media available to them. You see it as well, right? I don't have television, so I don't watch the news. But somebody was telling me yesterday that all the reports of there's going to be not enough stuff for Christmas presents. And I was like, oh, I hadn't heard that. Okay. I mean, that doesn't necessarily apply to me because I'm not buying a lot of Christmas presents, but yeah. And so, I mean, they're doing it again, right? Like it's one thing after another, because here's the thing is if we as human beings, right, don't believe that we have that control, right? That don't believe that we have control of our emotions, that we can create the happiness, right, or the positive spectrum of emotions, then we're going to continuously be looking elsewhere. Yeah. A lot of the things that you referred to around intergenerational traumas, right? With Trail of Tears, with African Americans and slavery, is that there was a process, right, where things were taken away,
Yes.
right, and they made those folks believe, they influenced their worldview. They created a belief system that you're not good enough, right? They created a belief system that for whatever reason,
better than you. I think that's
right,
really the belief system that gets like, don't worry, we've got you. We
yeah,
know better than you.
exactly, yeah. So even yeah, as our great grandparents and our grandparents, right, have lived through those traumas, and because that was part of their belief system, that's what they were taught, right, it directly influences what we believe and what we understand. So not to say that we can just throw all that history away, right? Like that definitely shapes our worldview and shapes cultures, and even shapes the U.S., right, as a culture. But to understand what specific aspects of our worldview that has shaped, right, and taking the opportunity to learn from that, right, and then to be able to kind of make that step of, okay, this is what I have inherited, if you will, and I get to choose if I'm going to continue to pass on that mindset, that belief system, that thought process, to those generations to come, to those folks around me.
Yeah. And I think I want to go back to where you said, like, we can't just like move past the history and just like not act like it doesn't exist, but say like it doesn't matter now, right? Like, here's where I always get stuck with all those hot topics, is because the rhetoric is that I understand, not being part of those communities. So I'm an outsider taking in information, right? The rhetoric seems to be, these things happen to us as a culture, right? And we are going to blame the people that did it to us. And we expect the people that did it to us to change and make amends.
Mm-hmm.
And here's why I don't like that. Because I am still the victim then.
Yeah, you're not taking control.
Yeah, I'm expecting this external thing to come and apologize and make amends. And so I'm giving my power to them still. And it still feels terrible because I'm expecting humans to change and behave the way I want them to. And we all know historically, humans do not do that. They don't do it. Right. So then I'm still staying stuck in this powerless place.
Yeah.
And it feels terrible and it makes me more angry, right? And it makes me more frustrated. And like that doesn't serve any human. So if we can move to a place, or I think like let's just say the women topic, because I'm a woman and I'm a part of that culture. Like if I move to a place as a woman, instead of saying like men did it, they need to change it, it's like, great, they did it. This is part of my legacy. This is how I've also been programmed to believe that there's glass ceilings and blah, 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 right? They did it. But I'm going to take full responsibility for me and my life, right? And I know that I'm in control. And so I'm going to change the rhetoric for me and for my daughter. And I'm going to go to this job interview. And if they lowball me, I tell them to fuck off. And I'm going to go and interview at this job. And like, this is how much I'm worth. And this is how much you'll pay me. You may not pay me that person will, because I know I'm worth it. Right. And like changing that the empowerment and the rhetoric within me. So then I start being confident and in control of me. And I teach people how I want to be treated. And I don't allow them to treat me how I like. When you come from that victim mentality, you teach them it's okay to treat you shitty. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
It does make sense.
I have
Yeah.
like an example if I can share it real quick. So I
Sure.
did a post yesterday about a situation at a business that I go to. And the business owner, there was a misunderstanding that I did not even know about between me and this other person. And the business owner took it upon themselves to confront me about it. And just the way the owner's like stance, their tone, their energy triggered me, right? Like I have some verbal and emotional abuse in my history, right? And so my nervous system was hijacked because my subconscious brain was like, this isn't safe. This looks very similar to what we've lived through. And so I went into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I fawned. And fawn is just like where you just people please the shit out of this to get out of it, right? And I did. And I was so apologetic. And how do I make this better, right? And days later, like the emotions hit me. Like that did not feel safe for me. I felt threatened.
Yeah.
And I still go to this business. And I find myself months later, like anxious. Like I kind of don't want to go there. And I'm anxious about it because I don't want to see these people. Right. And I was talking to my coach about it. And I was like, I think I should have a conversation with this owner. She's like, why? What are you wanting out of it? And I was like, I want them to apologize to me. I want them to hear me out and I want them to apologize so I can feel safe. And then it hit me. I was like, wait, safety's an emotion. I create emotions. I have to create my safety. This person apologizing is only giving me thoughts where I will feel safe. So I feel safety. I don't need, like, they're not going to apologize.
Right.
They're not.
Yeah.
So I realized like I have to create safety for me. I don't give my power to this person anymore. How do I create safety in me? It's that I create boundaries and I have my own back. And I make decisions like this is how I'm going to show up when I go to this place of business. If this person addresses me, I'm going to either walk off or I'm going to say I'm not comfortable having this conversation. And I'm going to risk the relationship to them not like me anymore to
Yeah.
protect me. That's how I create safety for me. And that's what I'm thinking, like, that's how we need to address these things is we realize like I create the emotions. I create safety. I create empowerment. It's not expecting the other humans to do or say anything for me to have those things. Because if I waited for that, that person's never going to give me an apology. So I'm constantly going to feel unsafe there until I finally leave. And I'm just not willing to leave.
Yeah. That's a perfect example. Yeah. Because I think when we think about like from that, historical perspective, even within from like a racism point of view, right? And a lot of like things that have been done to different cultures, right?
Mhm.
Even refugees, to be honest, right? Not just Native Americans and Blacks or Jewish folks, but even across the world, you're giving up control, right? When you have expectations, right? Like, I need so and so to apologize.
Yeah.
I need, for this to happen in order for me to feel safe. You underlined that beautifully, because here's the thing: is sometimes we've seen situations, even like historically, even within this country, where the government has apologized, but it didn't change anything. Yeah. I mean,
Words. Like most of us, if somebody does something shitty to you and you're like, I'm sorry, you're like, great, that you're sorry, but I still kind of hate you.
exactly. We think that will fix it, or we think that'll make us, feel safer or happy or feel better about the situation. In all reality, it doesn't.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because they because we have, right, that power and that control to create that safety. So as much as you may want something out of somebody else, right, like, oh, I want you to acknowledge your role in this situation, I want you, you know, we can want all day long, but then if that does come to pass, is it really going to change,
Right.
yeah, the situation? It's not going to change the history of it, but and it, I don't know, it could make some people feel better for a little bit,
Right.
until they go home and start thinking about it again
Right.
a couple of weeks, a couple months later, and be like, oh, you know what, that didn't even come close
Yeah.
to what I needed or what I wanted, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think recognizing how the, or how do I want to say this? Recognizing that in order to create that safety, right? In order to create that feeling of comfort, that even that those feelings of being okay with things, right? So we may not have to be happy about things, but even just, yeah, being able to understand and feeling even copacetic about things, that comes from within.
Yeah.
And the more that we look outward for those things, the further we're going to be from being well, right?
Yeah.
The further we're going to be from our wellness in our mind, body, and spirit. The more divided we're going to be, which, yeah, creates a that legacy for trauma, because that's going to influence, right, those folks around us, those family members, those kiddos, those, yeah, friends and people we interact with.
Yeah. And it's not like, because I can hear people, I mean, in my own mind, it offers up like, well, like forgiveness, right? Like people should take responsibility for their sins is not the word I want to say.
Their actions.
Yeah, their trespasses against us, trespasses against me, trespasses against groups. Like they should take responsibility for it, right? Yeah, but you can't make the humans do that.
Right. Yeah.
So you waiting around for them to take responsibility and ask for your forgiveness, like maybe you'll get it, maybe you won't. But in the meantime, you are still suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I would love for the humans to make amends. I would love for the humans. I would love for that owner to apologize to me, right? The reality is that it may or may not happen, and I refuse to wait around any longer. I've waited for months for that safety beat to be created,
Yeah.
and it hasn't. And I'm tired of waiting because I'm the only one that can create safety in me.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter what they do. That owner can do whatever they want now. I don't care, because I'm creating safety in me and I want to be at that place, and I'm going to be at that place.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have boundaries, and I'm going to risk the relationship. And I'm just risking the relationship was huge for me, because sometimes I want to people please people I like and respect. And it's like, nope, I'm not going to people please you anymore. Like,
Yeah.
you could not like me, but I have my own back. And I'm going to lead this so we can start wrapping it up into creating this legacy. My niece is like my daughter. Like I could create a legacy for her that she's unsafe in this world because she's a female, and that it's not just men. Like I've had men and women both verbally and emotionally abuse me. So I could just tell her like the humans are going to abuse you.
Yeah.
Just be careful, be on your guard, right? Like the humans kind of are bad, and as a woman you're in a weaker place. But that's not the legacy I want to create for her. I want to create a legacy of, you're human, male or female, it doesn't matter. You're human, and you are in control of your world and your reality by your brain. And all the emotions that you want to feel, you get to create. And all the emotions you don't want to feel, they're just vibrations, and you just get to feel them and move on. But there's an abundant world out there that you get to create however you want it to be, right? You can have as much wealth as you want. You can have the career you want. You teach the humans how you will be tolerated to be treated.
Right. Yeah. Um, I I hope that the more folks who hear this message, right, understand and recognize how they can create that legacy as well, right? Um, because if we're teaching our kids, our grandkids, like I said, people around us, if you're teaching them how to treat you, and what you'll accept and what you won't tolerate, helps them see, right, an influence of, look how she did that, right? Like, look how she handled herself. Look at, yeah. And so it gives them sort of a glimpse of there can be something different, right? Yeah. Because if we're able to create a legacy of abundance, right, in our health, our wealth, right, in our mindset and our belief system, that creates a ripple effect, right, and creates generations that have more power within themselves to create a different world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to leave one last example, and I don't have all the facts on it because I don't watch the news either. I get my news from JP Sears and just other like little Instagram things. But what I understand is that Southwest Airlines sent out a mandate that all their pilots had to be vaccinated. And so either a bunch of their pilots quit or went on strike. I'm not sure. And they had to cancel hundreds of flights because of this, right? Just digging into their pocketbook. That's expensive. And I just saw where they released the mandate and said, okay, they don't have to be vaccinated. It's because that group of people were like, you're not going to treat us like this. You want to mandate this? Great. We're not going to fly.
Exactly.
And then the man that's in charge of Southwest was like, shit.
We can't afford
this. Okay, we'll listen to the people. Right.
Right.
But it's like, you see like that in that, just that small multi-billion-dollar organization, the people influenced what the powers that be had to say. Like, no, you're not going to treat us like this.
Yeah, exactly. That's a fantastic example, right? Yeah, brings us kind of up to date with where we are in the world around us. I know a lot of folks are feeling sort of that pressure, right? So when you're creating or when you're finding that power to express your voice and to teach folks, how you want to be treated, it says a lot. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's awesome. I hadn't heard that.
yeah, I think it was a cool story. So think about what legacy you guys are leaving for your children, for your friends, for your family members, because you're leaving one or the other. And what's more importantly is the legacy you're leaving for yourself. Like, just ponder it. All right, guys, we'll see you guys next week.